Yeah, you're probably not rejoicing with this. See what I mean? No, she only great.
Room and someone wants it as well.
Oh, she deserves it. Okay, so which one's yours?
That's a garage. So where is it? Bedroom there. That's bedroom and massive dressing room. So we're building up road there. And it's not that I need that much space, it's just that I don't want to see his house. No, that's all through to that's all the double tree covered to here. I don't have a property. Yeah, well, there's a door, there's actually a yeah, it's just a normal platform. Just these two. And these don't have to be
So that way they come back.
and then I'm putting on the butler's pantry. This is like a walk around.
And which one are you out?
So that'll go into
This is the point.
so this it'll be this way. Like the front gate. I've got a plastic tape in my toes. You need to do this. So we're not human. And I said, he said, he goes, oh, he's so not my nose. So I said, he said, I have these I said, where are you going? He said, oh, I'm 28. So do you have a favourite
Israel, to your tents!
I better know, she tells me.
Anthony doesn't like alcohol, so I always try to get it off.
The shofar calls us together.
Is anyone sitting here? Oh, awesome.
this is all veranda.
Alright, Laurie, I'll go back there. I've got my phone. Sorry.
Alright, grab a chair.
Grab a chair anywhere.
Get comfortable. Everybody get a drink if you want.
Chair, video one.
That'll be good.
Because that's
Should we get you a chair behind the desk so you can't come over? I want to get back there. Sorry.
Oh, I have to put rules on the corner. Got papers in the corner.
So I can raise that.
You know how Phoebe was sitting next to me last week? She goes, that was really good. I really understood everything you said. Normally I don't understand. Everything goes over my head, but I really got that teaching. I thought that was really good.
All right. Settle down.
You gotta blow the horn.
At the beginning, he'd blow the horn and everyone would just gather. Now he blows the horn and everyone just.
They ignore me.
Still talking.
They ignore me now.
It was her. Yeah.
She's still
I was really
going.
good last week when she wasn't here.
Okay.
All right, lively bunch. Settle down, please.
Here we go.
Baruch Hashem, Yehovah. Okay, blessings you come in the name of Yehovah. Let's pray, please. Okay. Heavenly Abba, we thank you for your love and your mercy. We thank you for the feasts that are coming, the feast of Shavuot. Pray, Father, that we'll be ready as we study today about this holy feast, that you would enlighten our eyes, that we would have eyes to see and ears to hear what the Spirit of God has to say to the congregation of the saints today. Father, may your word not return to you void, but may accomplish that for which you sent it to us, and in us may it bring fruit to overabundance. Thank you, Father. In Yeshua's name, I commit myself to you. May I disappear on your word and your Son, Yeshua, remain. In Yeshua's mighty name, amen. All right. So today we're not continuing with apologetics. We're going to give it a break since Shavuot is coming up. It's important that we understand what's coming up. Next week, Sunday, not on Shabbat, but on Sunday, we're going to get together for Shavuot, for the Feast of Weeks. Why do we call it the Feast of Weeks?
Because of Yoma.
Seven what? 7 weeks, right? We're going to read it right now. Leviticus 23, verse 15 to 22.
I believe that Aurora has it behind her.
15 to 22. Somebody read it for us?
Cool.
Leviticus or Vayikra, chapter 23.
The Feast of Weeks.
Verse 15, yep. Starting from verse 15 to 22.
And you shall count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths shall be completed. Count 50 days to the day after the 7th Sabbath, then you shall offer a new grain offering to the Lord. You shall bring from your dwellings 2 wave loaves of 2/10 of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour. They shall be baked with leaven. They are the first fruits to the Lord. And you shall offer with the bread 7 lambs of the first year, without blemish, 1 young bull, and 2 rams. They shall be as a burnt offering to the Lord, with their grain offering and their drink offerings, an offering made by fire for a sweet aroma to the Lord. Then you shall sacrifice 1 kid of the goats as a sin offering, and 2 male lambs of the first year as a sacrifice of a peace offering. The priest shall wave them with the bread of the first fruits as a wave offering before the Lord, and with the 2 lambs. They shall be holy to the Lord for the priest. And you shall proclaim on the same day that it is a holy convocation to you. You shall do no customary work on it. It shall be a statute forever in all your dwellings throughout your generations.
When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not wholly reap the corners of your field when you reap, nor shall you gather any gleaning from your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and for the stranger. I am the Lord your God.
Amen. All right, so a few things appear there.
Just makes these chairs have to wait.
What else we got there? Okay, so let's start from that one. There's a few things that are told to us there in Leviticus 23. We are to count 7 weeks from the morrow, from the day after the Shabbat of Pesach, right? So from the Passover, Pesach, Passover, the Shabbat inside the Passover, because Passover lasts for about 7 days, right? Unleavened bread, Passover is the whole thing. So there is a Shabbat in the middle of that. And the day after the Shabbat is what is called first fruits. First fruits. Okay? So after the Shabbat, the next day is a Sunday, yeah? So the first Sunday after the Passover is called first fruits. Yep? So from there we begin the count, which we have been, as you can see on the wall there. We are to count the weeks, 7 weeks, and we are to count 50 days. But not just the weeks, the days too. Right? So we count the weeks and we count the days. There's a reason for that. We're going to look at it today. We are to bring 2 loaves of bread, and you're going to see later on, it's actually leavened bread. Right? Now, leaven is not to enter the temple of God at any time except during the feast of Shavuot or Pentecost, meaning 50, Pente meaning 50 in Greek. So it's the only time that leaven enters the holy place. Right? And there is a reason for that as well. We're going to look at that. There are sacrifices involved with that. There are different types of sacrifices, as we studied that before. Sacrifices for sin. What else? Sacrifices for
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving. And
Peace.
sacrifices
Peace.
of peace. Right? So there's at least 3 types of sacrifices that are prescribed in Scripture. Which ones did Messiah fulfill?
Sin.
Sacrifice for sin. He was our Passover lamb. Sacrifice for sin. What else?
It's peace too, wasn't it?
Yeah, the chastisement of our peace was placed upon him. He became our sacrifice of sin and of peace. Was he a sacrifice of thanksgiving? No. No. Nowhere in Scripture does it say that he was a sacrifice of thanksgiving. Why is that?
So we continue to.
So we each need to come and give thanks. Right? Gratefulness is up to us. Right? It's also known as the free will offering, or the offering of thanksgiving. Yeah. So that one still, you're still able to do that, but there's some logistics that don't work. So there's some issues with that one. We're not going to get into that today. We have to reap the fields if you agrarian society like they were. but not the corners. Why not the corners?
Leave it for the poor.
For the poor and the needy.
We don't.
Yeah. Why were the corners so important? Why not the middle? Just leave the middle, a little square in the middle of your field. Why the corners?
Does it represent the four corners of the earth?
Four corners of the earth? Yeah, but why is God interested in four corners?
Because that's where the tzitzits are.
Very good. Very good.
Wow.
So it's a reminder, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
The
It's a
talit,
corner.
the talit, right, has four corners, right, which represent the authority of Yehovah, of God. Right? He said to his people, you are to put tzitzit, or tassels. Tzitzit, tassels. Yeah,
Two S's.
tassels. Tassels. On the corners, on the fringes of your garment, on the corners of your garment.
Did you say it represents authority? What
Yeah.
did you say?
The corners represent the authority of Messiah. The corners represent the authority. The tzitzit represents like the wedding band, right? The tzitzit represent, basically it's like a betrothal ring or a wedding ring.
Is that those strings that you've got?
Yep,
I
the
said.
tzitzit.
Okay.
Numbers 15
Mm-hmm.
tells us about those. God's people are to wear tzitzit as a sign of the covenant between them and God. Says this is a sign. There are three signs of the covenant, right? Shabbat is one. The tzitzit are another one. What's the third one? Boys? Circumcision. There are three signs of the covenant. Once you enter into marriage covenant with God, like Israel did at Mount Sinai, you are to have the three signs of the covenant. One of them is the corners, tassels on the corners of your garment. So, why is the corners important when he's talking about Shavuot? He's bringing you to something very interesting.
Is it Yeshua with the fact that he was the corner stone?
Yeah. God's provision, right? It's His authority, it's His provision. So that's why the corners belong to Him, and therefore it belongs to the poor, to those who don't have enough. Right? They represent God, God's authority, God's provision. That's why the corners are important. All right? So let's move on from there. Why is Shavuot so important? It's perhaps one of the most important feasts in some respects. It's called the Feast of Weeks because it brings us back to another thing, and we're going to talk about that in a second.
Isn't it Pentecost?
50 days. Pentecost just means 50.
Oh,
Pente is the Greek word for
just
50.
means 50.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pente means 50. It's a Greek word. The Hebrew word is Shavuot or weeks. Shavuot means weeks. That means weeks. And how many Shabbats are in the 7 weeks?
7.
7. So we count in 7 Shabbats. 7 Shabbats of 7. So 7 times 7 is 49. Very interesting number. Why do we count 50 days?
It rounded.
7 times 7, 49.
Plus 1.
Because it says
Plus-
it's the day after Shabbat.
1
Plus 1.
is the 50th day. Okay, so very nice maths. I can do maths. At least the basic maths anyway. I just wanted to show off my maths, that's okay.
We all.
What does the 49th and the 50th bring to mind when you're thinking about numbers, just basic numbers in the scriptures? When you think the 50th. Who was that? Yeah?
Jubilee.
Very good. Jubilee. So Jubilee. Straight away when you think of the 50th, you think of the Jubilee. These are Hebrews think. We think in numbers, Jubilee. Why did he say 50? Why did he say 50? 50 means Jubilee. Jubilee, or in the Hebrew, Yovel. What's the Jubilee? Can somebody explain to me what Jubilee is?
For all things are pardoned, is it?
Yep.
Cancelled, pardoned, returned.
Yep.
Can't think-
Captives go free.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Lands are returned to the original owners. So in Israel, if you had been given a portion from the tribes, when Joshua went into the land, they divided the land. So you could actually hire out the land for 49 years, right? You could take your neighbor's land because he wasn't going to use it, so you could use it from him and pay him like a rent kind of thing. For 49 years, you could do that. On the 50th year, it had to return to him. It had to be returned to him. And a new deal would have to be brokered for the next coming 49 years after that.
The Sabbath of years.
Yeah. And the land had to rest. How many times a year did it have to rest?
One. in
How many
year.
times a year?
Ah, very good.
Yes.
How many times did it have to rest?
Every 7 years.
Every seven
One
years.
for a year.
So that's called a Shabbat of years or a Shemitah. Shemitah. You know what's interesting about the Shemitah? If you look at the global crisis, the economical global crisis, it always falls on the Shemitah. Every 7th year we have an economical crisis of some kind. It falls on that day. It's very interesting. Because the land is supposed to rest on the 7th year. This is a commandment that God gave from the beginning. So what happened if you don't keep the Shemitah?
Go into captivity.
Very good. After a while you go into captivity. It's in the commandment. So we're gonna get there in a second. It reminds us of the 4th commandment. Why would it remind us of the 4th commandment? What's the 4th commandment?
The Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath.
Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy.
I know
Right?
that sound.
4th commandment. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it. There it is. To keep it set apart. Holy just means set apart, right? Holy means set apart.
One up.
One P? Fine. Set apart. To be given a purpose. Right? If I have my favorite cup, the Kiddush cup, and I don't use it for anything else except Kiddush, for the blessing of the wine, then that cup is set apart for that specific purpose always. Right? We got plates that are only come out on Shabbat. Those plates are set apart for a purpose and nothing else. They're not used for anything else, right? They are holy. A person that is consecrated to the temple, like the prophet, what was it?
Shmuli.
Samuel. He was set apart because he was consecrated to the temple. He was given to the temple, right? So he's set apart for a purpose. That means holy. The 4th commandment, Jehovah says, this is my Shabbat, right? Says these are my feasts. These are my feasts. These are the feasts of Jehovah. They're not the feast of the Jews, right? Leviticus 23 begins by saying, these are my feasts, which you are to keep. Right? This is the feast of Jehovah. So they're not the feasts of the Jews, they're not the feasts of Israel, they're not the feasts, they're his feasts. Yeah? He declares that in Leviticus 23 at the beginning of it. These are my feasts. So, what's the word for feasts there?
Moedim.
Hebrew word moedim. Right? And we know that moedim is a word derived from other words. Another word that means, what does it mean? Moedim?
Seasons.
No? Starts with R.
Rehabilitation.
In Hebrew?
Rehearsal.
Oh, rehearsal.
Rehearsal. What?
That's rehearsal.
And everything.
I was thinking Hebrew. Hello.
A moedim is a rehearsal. So it is a moedim is directly
Yeah.
translated as an appointed time. Right? Or appointment. Who scheduled the appointment?
Abba.
Jehovah scheduled those appointments. He said, these are my appointments. You are to keep it. Yeah? So he gave us an appointment. In other words, he's going to be there with us. He said, this is the days that I've set out for you to meet with me. Yeah? These are the days that I've set out for you to meet with me. We're going to rehearse. What are we going to rehearse? Different things, right? The coming of Messiah, Passover, the death of Messiah, unleavened bread, right? The burial. First fruits, the resurrection of Messiah. Right? We're going to be rehearsing for when it actually happens, so that we recognize it. And Shavuot, what are we rehearsing on Shavuot?
Holy Spirit.
Party
Isn't
time?
it coming of the Holy Spirit, wasn't it?
Coming of the Holy Spirit,
Yeah.
Yeah.
giving of the Torah.
Yeah.
Right? By tradition, his giving of the Torah was actually 50 days
Mount
after they
Sinai.
left Egypt. Sorry, after they left Egypt. So all those wonderful things, but we're gonna go a little bit deeper than that. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor, and the seventh day is a set apart day. Jehovah worked on creation for 6 days, and on the seventh day he set it apart. He called it Shabbat, not the seventh day. He actually called it Shabbat. 6 days and Shabbat. He rested on that day as an example for us, because God wasn't tired, right? I mean,
He had done a lot,
he did do a lot. I thought he was tired.
to be
Anyway,
fair.
Messiah will return. As we say in Hebrew, Hu Yavo. He is coming back. And he will reign for how long?
A millennium?
1,000 years? Why 1,000?
Revelations.
The Sabbath of the
Isn't it
7
one
years.
day equals 1,000?
Yep, 1 day equals 1,000 for God,
6
and
years
1,000 equals 1 day.
Yeah.
So we've had about thereabouts
6,000?
about 6,000 years of human
Yeah.
life on the earth, give or take.
6,000.
Give or take.
Yeah.
And
Almost 6,000.
so it's going to be
So what's the
1,000.
7,000?
The
Except for
millennium.
day of rest, and it's going to be 1,000 years of
7,000
peace with Him.
will be the millennium. So we're almost there, guys. We're
Nearly
almost
there.
there.
Yeah.
Anytime now.
Mm-hmm.
Plus 1,000, 7,000.
Plus 1.
Money for 7,000.
Plus the millennium. He's coming back to reign for 1,000 years.
Where are musicians?
There are Shabbats, therefore, of weeks, the Shabbats of days,
5 years.
the Shabbats of years, and there's millennial Shabbats. Okay, the Shabbats of everything. So from Passover's first fruit, right, from the day after the Shabbat of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or Passover. Passover is the whole 3 feasts, by the way, not just the first one. We count the 50 days. Why do you think we count 50 days, apart from the fact that it's a prelude to the millennial reign or the Jubilee? Where does it start? It starts in first fruits, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where does it end? What's the feast of Shavuot? What do we do in Shavuot?
We bring 2 loaves of leavened bread.
Yeah. Of what? Two loaves of leavened bread of the first fruits. So it begins and ends in first fruits. We're talking about harvests, right? Now that in itself should tell you something straight away in your mind. When did Messiah talk about the harvest? The end of days?
The harvest is plenty. The harvest is ripe.
Yep.
But the workers are few.
Yep. So he's talking about people, right? He's telling us something about a group of people. What's the first fruits about? What harvest is it?
Barley.
Harvest of barley, right? So the first one has to do with barley. It's the harvest of barley. The second one is the harvest of wheat. What do we equate barley with?
Judah right now, don't we?
Where does barley grow wild?
Israel.
Right in the land of Israel. Right? So it's talking about with the people in the land. So in this case it's Judah, the Jews. Right? It grows wild there. What about wheat? Huh? Yeah, the wheat and the chaff. What is he talking about, the wheat and the chaff? Is he talking about Judah?
No.
Or is he talking about
The rest of the world.
Israel, the rest of the world, right? The world. The nations. The world and the nations. Did you know this feast, Shavuot, is called the Feast of Nations? It's also known as the Feast of Nations. So if you were from the nations and you wanted to bring a gift to the God of the Hebrews, you would come on Shavuot, because on that day you were allowed, people from the nations were allowed to enter in the outer courts to bring their offerings. Right? Same as with the bread, the bread was leavened. So here we got the unleavened bread, right? And here is the leavened bread. What's leaven symbol of?
Doctrine.
Sin?
False doctrine.
You sure? It's a misunderstanding.
Unleavened was the time in the wilderness out of Egypt. Is that
Yep.
representing that time?
Yep. Unleavened does not represent. Leaven does not represent sin.
False teaching.
Leavened is
Right? It actually tells you, do not be polluted with the leaven of the Pharisees. Right? It tells you the leaven of the Pharisees is hypocrisy and false teachings. Right? So leaven is equated with hypocrisy and false teachings. Right? Wrong doctrines. Well, the world is full of that. But on this day, they're allowed to come in. Right? It talks about, in Ezekiel talks about, or Jeremiah, Ezekiel talks about the coming of Messiah and the millennial reign, where the nations will have to come back. right, and offer sacrifices. During the millennium, the sacrifices are reinstated, by the way. And whoever doesn't bring a sacrifice from the nations, the rain will be withheld from them.
Drought.
Right? You've read that? Yeah. So the Feast of Shavuot is going to be celebrated during the millennial reign as well. Right? But the nations are allowed to come in on those days. The Feast of Passover, is it open for everyone? No. Right. It says part of the Feast of Passover is those who are circumcised can come in. Only those who are circumcised. And if anybody wants to come into the feast, they need to be circumcised. They need to have their house circumcised, all the males. Right? So this feast is secluded only for Judah and the people of Israel. Right? They are with God already. This one is open for everyone. So there seems to be like two different things happening here. One is for those who are already in, and the other one is an invitation. So this is an invitation, basically. Shavuot is the feast of invitation, to invite the people to come in and be part of it, be part of the house of God. So this is basically the feast of the gospel, if you like, to the world. Making sense, or? Yeah?
So is the Passover only for males? Is that what it was?
No.
Because you're talking about circumcision.
No. So for the feast of Passover, all the males in your house need to be circumcised. That is part of the requirements to enter a Passover feast. You and all the males in your house need to be circumcised, all the servants in your house. And if a stranger wants to come and keep the Passover, him and all his house need to be circumcised as well. They're not allowed unless they are circumcised. So, part of the covenant, having all the signs of the covenant. So, what's the fourth letter in the Hebrew alphabet? So we said Shavuot is it reminds us of the fourth commandment because it's Shabbat, right?
No.
So fourth commandment is Shabbat.
Wait, Tracy's gonna sing it for everybody.
That's how I was remembering as well.
That's awesome. Alright, let's sing it together, ready? Aleph, Bet, Bet, Aleph, Bet, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. Alright. Start. Aleph,
Bit and bit count as one.
Bet, Bet, which is the one with the dot, without the dot.
I already lost that one.
Gimel.
That's not the one we're talking about.
That's a horrible Gimel. That's 1, 2, 3. What's Dalet? Dalet is the fourth. Sorry, that's not Dalet. Dalet is the fourth letter of the alphabet, of the Hebrew alphabet. You know what the Dalet looks like in Paleo Hebrew or in ancient pictograph Hebrew? 10th flat, which symbolizes a door. What's the Hebrew word for door?
Delit. It's right there, it's got a sign on it still.
Yeah. So the only difference is the vowel points, which were added on later on. So in the ancient Hebrew, there's no difference between the two words. It's the same word. It's a door. Right? Let's read John chapter 10, verse 9.
I think Katrina
Could
does.
be burning.
No, it's not bad. I pulled it out.
It's not. Okay, John.
She is back.
Sorry. I don't know how I'm asking.
John chapter 10, verse 9.
10. Here it is.
Yes, please.
I am the door. Whoever enters through me, he shall be saved, and shall go in and shall go out and find pasture.
What did Yeshua say?
I am the door.
He is the door. He's the Dalit. See the connections, how it all goes back? He's the door, he's the Dalit. I stand at the door. I stand at the Dalit. If anybody comes out, he's not going in, by the way. He's just knocking at the door.
Revelations 3.
You need to come out. Come out of her, my people, be separate. Right? You need to respond. He's not coming to get you. He's just at the door. You need to move.
You've already arrived at the door.
I am the door that will come in and go out.
Find green pastures.
Yeah. So the fourth commandment has to do with Messiah. The feast of Shavuot is the fourth feast. Has to do with Messiah. How many feasts have we got, guys?
6 or 7?
7?
Good job. Now that's your hot points.
You guys
Right.
count for
So, can you tell me the feast?
Anywhere between 1 and 10.
In that case, it's 9. It's Hanukkah.
Okay, what's the feast? The Moedim. What's the first one?
Passover.
Passover. Passover. What's the next one?
First fruits.
Come on, guys.
first fruits.
Unleavened bread.
11 first fruits.
Unleavened bread. The next one.
First
First
fruits.
fruits.
Shavuot.
First fruits. Shavuot. Shavuot. What's the next one after Shavuot?
Trumpet.
Yom Kippur?
Oh, Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur or Yom Teruah?
Yom Teruah. Sorry, yeah. I was thinking how.
Day of trumpets.
Yom Teruah. And then 10
Day
days.
of trumpets or day of blowing
Yes.
trumpets.
Trumpets.
Then is Yom Kippur or Day of Atonement.
No, I can't. Have to go to the shops.
Day of Atonement. What's the last one? Sukkot or Feast of Tents. Sukkot. Sukkot or Tents. The menorah, right? A symbol of the anointed. Right? Oil, the anointed. Yep. What's the middle candle called in there?
Sem. How do you say sun? Shemesh. Is it?
Shemesh is the
Shemesh.
sun.
But I'm
Aaron,
guessing it's
what's the
round.
middle one?
Can't remember the word. Shemesh is Sunday.
Yeah.
Ba.
So if it's called the sun, then it is Shemesh.
Shamash.
It's very close to the Shemash, which means a servant. It's the servant candle. The middle one is called the servant candle. What did Yeshua say? I did not come
To be served.
to be served, but to serve. He is the servant. Right? Whoever wants to be greatest in the kingdom must become his brother's servant. Yeah?
Do you need anything?
Shavuot, therefore, is the feast of Messiah. This is the feast of Messiah. Okay, so very important feast. And what's it all about?
Spirit.
Yeah, so we have two things that happen during Shavuot. On the first instance, we had Mount Sinai. I'll make the top black. Mount Sinai. And we got the giving of the Torah. Torah just means instructions, right? The giving of the instructions of God at Mount Sinai, which included the Ten Commandments. Actually, they call the 10 Devar, the 10 words or the 10 vows. Like when you get married, when you give your vows, this is what happened at Mount Sinai. In fact, it says that in the scriptures later on that he married Israel at Mount Sinai. Right, so these are the vows, the ketuvah, the signing of the vows of the covenant. Right? But it wasn't just the Ten Commandments that he gave there, he gave the instructions for life, right? How to live in a community, in a society, all the how to do things when somebody gets sick, somebody is a woman or a man, cleansing rituals, or how to basically maintain health and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of good stuff in those instructions that he gave. Right? He's the creator. So he gave us instructions as to how he set everything to be. Right? So it's not just about laws. Yeah? They're instructions.
It's the other instructions.
Yeah. Do we have to keep all the instructions, all the laws?
No.
All the ones that are meant for us.
Well, but the scriptures say if you keep one of the laws, you have to keep all of it, right?
Context.
Yeshua didn't keep all of them.
That's right. Did Yeshua keep all the laws? I came to fulfill the law. Huh? What are you talking about? Well, he couldn't keep the laws of the women, right? The menstrual laws, he couldn't keep the man. Right? He couldn't keep the Levitical laws because he wasn't, well, he was a Levite, but he wasn't a Kohen allowed into the temple to minister there, right? So he didn't keep the Levitical laws of letting the hair grow and putting the turban on.
That's right.
He didn't break them because he didn't have to do it anyway.
But they weren't all applicable to him.
Yeah, this is the point. All these instructions are not applicable to everyone. Some instructions are applicable for men. Some instructions are applicable for women. Some instructions are applicable to the Levites. Some to the sons of Aaron. Some to kings. Specific ones. Yeah. Some to children. Yeah. So, no, we don't keep all the laws because they're not all given to us. So the giving of the Torah happened 50 days after leaving Egypt. And 50 days after Messiah's death and resurrection, we got there. The Ruach, Holy Spirit. Was that the first time that the Spirit came?
No.
Was that the birth of the church? No. No. The Spirit of God came way before that. He came on Yeshua himself when he was being baptized. He says in the scriptures that when he met with his disciples, I think it was 40 days after or something around that time, that he blew his Spirit on them. Right? So it wasn't the first time. Right? So for the disciples it wasn't the first time. It was the first time that the world got to experience the Spirit of God. It was the first time because he says, we're going to read it soon, in Acts chapter 2. We hear them, right? In our own tongues. Say the things that... We're going to read it. Let's go and read it. Acts chapter 2. Where is it? From verse 1. Can we have a read it on? Acts chapter 2, verse 1.
Let's check.
Oh, sorry. This close his eyes.
He was faking.
Yes, he was.
This is like Mum's gone
He was faking.
ridiculous.
It's like Big Fan.
1 to 11. Let's read that. Somebody read it for us?
When the day of Shabbat had come, they all were together in one place. Suddenly, there came from the heaven a sound like a mighty rushing wind, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting. And the tongues like fire spat out, appearing to them, and settled on one of them. They were filled with the Ruach HaKodesh and began to speak in their tongues in the Ruach, as the Ruach enabled them to speak out. Now Jewish people were staying in Jerusalem, devout men from every nation under heaven. And when the sound came of it, the crowd started gathering. They were bewitched, because each was hearing and speak in their own language. They were amazed and astonished, saying, all those who are speaking, aren't they Galileans? How is it that we can hear each other's, we can hear our own birth language? Thank you. Medes, Elamites, those living in Judah, and Cappadocia, Pontus, and Asia.
That other place.
Yes, what answer? Egypt and parts of Libya towards Syria, and visitors from Rome, both Jewish people and proselytes, Grecians and Arabs. We hear them declaring in our own tongues the mighty deeds of God.
Right, so we hear them speaking in our own tongue. So the gift of the speaking of tongues is not about speaking itself, but it's about those who are hearing them in their own tongue. So this has been for you.
It's quite clear about that.
Have a think about that one. It's actually in the Old Testament it tells Israel that because you will not hear me in your own tongue, you will not listen to me. Therefore I will speak to you with stammering lips. Right? It's a curse on Israel. It says, because you will not hear me, because you will not obey me. Therefore, in the later days, in the future, I will speak to you with stammering lips. Right? So that got fulfilled on that day. Why to the people of the nations if he was talking to Israel? The stammering lips in a foreign tongue, right? He says. But these are people of the world that are hearing him. Yeah. Yeah. Where was Israel? Right? Remember that God divorced Israel. Where did he send Israel?
The four corners.
To the four corners of the earth. He says that they were going to be indistinguishable from the people of the nations. Right? Messiah said, I did not come except for the lost sheep of the tribes of Israel. Right? So, where were these people of the tribes of Israel?
Amongst the nations.
Out in the nations. So together the people of Israel back, he has to open the door to everyone. Right? So this is what was happening on the day of Pentecost. He was calling out to Israel in foreign tongues. Because they couldn't understand Hebrew anymore. They were already mixed with the nations. So is it just Israel now that is allowed to come in? No, the door is open for everyone, right? Just like in the feast itself, the door is open for every one of the nations to come in. Right? With bad teachings and all, right? Leaven.
Yeah,
That's why you get the leavened bread. It's the only day that you get the leavened bread. So the invitation of the time of the Gentiles has to do with Shavuot. Because God is recalling Israel back. Come out from the four corners of the earth now. You know, and those who want to join in, come and join, become one. One with Israel, one with the people of God. So Acts chapter 2 is about the giving of the Spirit to the nations, the calling out, the gospel being preached to all nations. Where am I?
So, does that mean that the speaking in tongues, as we have it today,
Yep.
the ones that have gone out, they're supposed to understand that?
Well, they were hearing them. So the gift of the speaking of tongues, it doesn't say that people were speaking in tongues, in foreign tongues. It says that they were hearing them.
They were hearing.
We are hearing them in our native tongues. So the gift of tongues is probably more about the gift of hearing in tongues than the gift of actually speaking in tongues.
Of understanding languages rather than
Understanding in a foreign language. So for all we know, they could be all just speaking Hebrew, but people were understanding them in their own tongues. So it's not necessarily that they were speaking in different tongues, but the people were hearing them. That's what the scripture actually tells you there. We are hearing them in our own tongues. It doesn't say that they were speaking in those tongues.
so it's like to understand it.
I think if you don't understand the concept that the Jews were scattered and gone to nations where they adopted the nation's
They were
culture,
indistinguished.
language,
Yeah.
if you don't understand that, then you don't realize that they were, like you just said, they were hearing those Jews speaking, say, in Spanish. In
Yeah.
But we're not given the history, the behind the
Yeah.
scenes on what happened at that event.
Well, by that time, Israel had been out of the covenant with God for about 800 years. So they were in the surrounding nations still around, but as Josephus says, Josephus the historian talks about them being in the surrounding nations. But they had already lost their identity, their tongue. I mean, they were part of the other nations already. They had already integrated. They had lost everything. They had no idea who they were. Right? The Samaritans were actually northern tribe Israel, northern kingdom Israel. So anyway, going back to this, the point is that the gift itself connects you back to Shavuot, because it's an invitation to the feast, to come back in, to come back to become part of God's people again. Leviticus 26, verse 34 and 35. Let's have a look at that, just to understand a little bit more. Leviticus 26.
Is that 26?
26, 34, 35.
I got it.
Yep.
Then the land will enjoy its Sabbaths as long as it lies desolate and you are in your enemy's land. Even then the land will rest and enjoy its Sabbaths. As long as it lies desolate, it shall have rest, even the rest which it didn't have in your Sabbaths when you lived on it.
Right. So this is to Judah. God speaking to Judah and saying, well, because you did not keep the Shemitah, because you did not keep the Sabbath of years, the Shemitah, every 7th year, therefore the land will keep its Sabbaths when it becomes desolate from you. Right? In other words, when I take you out of the land and give you to the enemies, which in this case was who? Who was the enemy? Babylon? Right? So this is what God is telling them about the exile to Babylon. So Judah went to Babylon. The southern kingdom of Judah went to Babylon. Remember, Israel was divided into 2 kingdoms. 10 tribes to the north, 3 tribes to the south, or 2 tribes to the south, and the Levites spread across. So the southern kingdom, Judah, went to Babylon. And the reason why they were sent into exile is because they did not keep the Sabbaths of years. They didn't let the land rest every 7th year, like they should have. Right?
No, that's a note.
So,
This, yes,
let's have a quick look at this. So in the 7th year, so Leviticus 23, 28, 21,
no.
28, 21. What?
There's no 28. Leviticus. No.
Hold on. What did I do?
Is it 27 maybe?
26, 21. Sorry, my eyes.
26.
I read my own writing. 26, 21.
And if you walk contrary to me and refuse to obey me, I shall bring on you 7 times more plagues according to your sins.
Right, so if you refuse to hear me, how many times?
7.
7 times worse, right? So whatever God said to them there, if they disobey, they will get 7 times worse, right? So the original punishment would have been 10 years. 7, they ended up 70 years in exile. Right, Book of Daniel.
70 years.
They ended up 70 years until the coming of Darius, right, on the 6th year of King Darius. Anyway. So when does the count begin for the Shemitah? Anybody know? Got any ideas?
Every 7th year.
When does it begin?
The year before.
Just before year 1.
Which year?
Passover?
Passover? No.
What year?
Good guesses, huh?
Creation?
Shavuot.
The year
What
before
sets-
on Sukkot.
Huh?
The year before on Sukkot.
Just on, yeah. I reckon that. I'd go for that. We'll knock you off on that one.
No.
Were you being your question again?
Yours?
What was the question again?
When does the Shemitah count?
So
When does
7 years
the
after Sukkot. There you go.
when does the begin? When is year 1? When is year 1?
After they left Babylon.
How do we know when to first begin the count of year 1? After Babylon?
Yeah.
No.
Feast of Trumpets.
Cold.
Cold?
Let's play cold and hot.
Feast of Trumpets.
Yom Teruah.
Cold.
When the temple was built.
Oh, warm.
When the temple went down. I don't like this
When the
stuff.
When
temple
Yeshua
was down?
came?
No, that's cold. Huh? When Yeshua came? No, that's cold too.
Alright, so when the temple was built,
Right, so we got.
warm on that one.
There are 2 guys that we know of that tells us that. Ezra,
Yes.
and what was the other one? The really short guy.
Nehemiah?
The
Nehemiah.
really short guy, Nehemiah.
Nehemiah was a short man. No. No, that was okay.
Nehemiah.
Something
Nehemiah. Nehemiah tells us. Let's see if we can find that verse.
I am going to Google it because I'm not getting any answers here.
Let's see if we can find Nehemiah chapter 1. What does it say there? Yes? Speak up.
Is it giving up an answer?
Huh?
Is I give up an answer?
Yeah, you want to give an answer?
No, it's I give up an answer.
I give up.
Gives up.
The wall was broken down.
Yep. Can you read that first bit a little bit? Go on.
And they said to me, the remnant who are left of the captivity in the province are there in great evil and reproach. And the wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates are burnt with fire.
Right.
Where's that found?
Nehemiah 1.
So what was going on in the time of Ezra and in the time of Nehemiah?
They're rebuilding the temple and the walls
Yeah.
of Jerusalem.
So which one gives us the time clock? The temple, the altar, or the walls?
The altar? The wall?
Good guess. We're gonna go through all the guesses, are we?
Well, we've already said the temple. So,
It's the retaking of Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm. So Ezra came in first and he rebuilt the temple and the altar. Yeah? So
Was Ezra first?
Ezra came first, yeah. First wave of returns. He came first.
I thought it was Nehemiah.
Yeah. It was actually 14 years between the release from Babylon and the rebuilding when Nehemiah came into town. Okay?
Not
So
yet.
it's 14 years there. And the first one was Ezra. He rebuilt the temple and the altar. Not to its former glory. He says when people saw the state of the temple after they came back, they cried. Remembering the former days, the former years. When the first temple stood. It was nothing like it. Nehemiah then came in and built the walls of Jerusalem. The Lord is rebuilding Jerusalem. He gathers the outcasts of Israel. Remember that? Remember
How's
the
the
story?
song go?
The one that he's whistling? Yeah, anyway. That's Brother Michael Ben David. If anyone remembers. The Lord is rebuilding Jerusalem. He gathers the outcasts of Israel. It's actually in the prophecies of the end times. So, Nehemiah rebuilds Jerusalem.
The walls. Oh, yeah.
Jerusalem. And the moment he rebuilds Jerusalem, they keep the feast
They started then.
of Sukkot.
Yeah.
So they begin the count again. So from the day the walls are finished, and Jerusalem is the time clock. Jerusalem is the year one time clock. It wasn't the taking back of the temple of Ezra's time of rebuilding the temple or the altar. It wasn't the time of release from Babylon. It was the moment they took back Jerusalem. Right? Now what happened in 1967 and 1948? Before that? 1948?
It became, Israel became a nation.
Israel becomes a nation, or Judah
Or a
becomes a
state
nation.
of the United,
Yeah, so Israel is recognized as a state.
of the United Nations.
Yeah. And 1967, what happens in 1967?
To Jerusalem.
The 6-day war, the Holy War, they take Jerusalem.
So that was against Egypt, was it?
Against all the neighboring nations. They all gathered against them. Right? So in 6 days they take with, what is it, an eighth of the power that the nations around them had.
Is that the one that Australia was?
No,
Oh, it was
Australia was before that. Before 1948 was Australia.
That was Beersheba.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Beersheba with the Ottoman Empire.
I was just testing Nigel. You passed. Well done.
So in 1948, Israel returns to the land as a nation, but that doesn't set the clock for us. What sets the clock for us is Jerusalem, 1967. So 1967, 50 years. What's that?
1917. 2017.
2017, on the day of Shavuot, of Sukkot, sorry, just after the Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the last trumpet. The last trumpet is sounded on Yom Kippur. It announces the Jubilee. The Jubilee actually begins in Passover 2018.
That was last year. Yeah.
Passover 2018. Right? Nisan 1, 15 days before Passover, that's when the Jubilee begins.
Yom Kippur 2017 almost.
Yep. But freedom is announced to the nations on Shavuot of 2018. So this is basically the culmination of that year for the nations, when they are being set free,
So perfect.
up until next week.
Yeah, instead.
So in essence, we are counting the days of the nations, from last Shavuot to this Shavuot, 2019.
So when's the election year?
So the time of the Gentiles, basically, is between Shavuot, Sukkot to Sukkot. So we're counting down, till the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. Not setting up dates, but it could be next week, guys.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Maybe next week is like the coming of the,
We're not sure. We're not sure of the exact
Could
day, but
be.
we know the times and seasons, right? That the Father has said. He says we know that we have no need that anyone should teach us because we are aware, right? No one knows of the time and season. That's for those who are perishing, those who are in darkness. Paul, speaking to the converts, he says, "But you have no need that anybody should teach you, because you are in the light, and you know the times and seasons." Right? Context. Who was he talking to? Two different audiences.
Sorry, what do you mean by the time of the Gentiles, the fulfillment, culmination of them?
So, the time of the Yobel, or the time of the setting free,
Oh, yeah.
right, is from 2018 to 2019. Shavuot 2018 to Shavuot 2019.
Oh, that's 50 years.
That's the 50th year, the Jubilee.
That's Jubilee.
So Shavuot. Shavuot 2018 to 2019. That's the year of Jubilee. That's when it finishes for the nations.
That's next week.
Yeah. So it ends for the nations next week. The year of Jubilee.
Sure. Sorry, I'm a bit thick.
Yeah.
So you're saying that that's it for the Gentiles? That could be.
That could be.
Yeah, could be.
If not, we'll probably need to wait
Oh, we've
another
got a
50
week,
years.
guys. Go and tell the whole world.
We'll probably need to wait another 50 years.
Yeah.
If not. Right? Because the coming of Messiah will coincide with the feasts.
Yeah,
Why do I know that? Because his coming coincided with the feast.
absolutely.
The first three feasts have to do with his coming.
Yeah,
His coming, his death, his resurrection.
Yeah.
Right? This is how we know the times and seasons, because we keep the feasts. We are in his appointed times. We are rehearsing so that we are aware of what's going on. So, yeah. Shavuot is the time of his return. Yep. And then the trumpet will sound, the day of trumpets. Right? The time of judgment will come on the day of Yom Kippur. And then we will be with him forevermore on the Feast of Tents, when he comes to dwell among his people. Right? So everything is set out in the feast for us.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Oh, definitely.
Take it.
I got it, definitely. Awesome.
Go out and preach, you've got a week.
Thank you, sis.
A week.
It's good because she's going to be able to cover 2 continents.
I know, we're preaching from the skies. So
Truth bombs.
what is it?
Truth bombs.
Truth bombs. There you go.
Wow.
All right. So we're not setting up dates, but we are to be aware of the times that we are living in. What things take place during Shavuot? Anybody know? What do we do during Shavuot?
The 2 loaves of leavened bread.
So we bring the 2 loaves. Yeah. So each person bakes 2 loaves. An omer. An omer. This is why we count the omer. An omer is roughly about 3.5 kilos of flour. It's actually 3.5 liters. So it's a liquid measure, but they measure flour in a liquid form. So I don't know how that works, but it's about 3.5 kilos, give or take. So what we do is we get 3.5 kilos of flour. We make 2 leavened loaves that big, and we bring them as an offering.
They
And we
measure
share
it in volume.
Yeah, they measure it in liquid form.
Would be measured in liquid form because when you're making leaven, it's actually liquid.
Possibly, not sure what the real explanation behind it is, but that's how they used to measure flour. It's a liquid measure. Or, yeah. That's my understanding of it so far anyway. So we bring the loaves, which symbolizes the harvest of nations. Why we bring 2?
North and South Kingdom.
Northern and Southern Kingdom getting together. We're also talking about the nations or the tribes of Israel. We speak about the houses. Yeah, what was that?
Israel and Judah.
Israel and Judah, that's right. So let's explain for those who don't understand about Israel and Judah what the difference is. What's the difference between Israel and Judah? So there was a kingdom called Israel. Israel, under the King David, right? It was one nation. It was divided first, but then it came together and it was one nation. 12 tribes, 13 really. 12 tribes, plus Levites, which were not counted because they were among all the people. They were the priests. And when King Solomon came, he kept the tribes together, but then when he died, after Solomon, there were 2 guys that divided the kingdom. There was Rehoboam, and what was the other one?
Jeroboam.
Jeroboam was the legit son.
No, he was a servant, wasn't he?
Was
yeah,
the-
no.
Yeah, and Rehoboam was the servant.
Oh, was it?
I'm pretty sure it's that way.
It's all right.
Somebody can check it if you want.
So it's very wrong.
Rehoboam and Jeroboam. They had very similar names. One was the legitimate son of Solomon. The other one was the servant.
Yes, servant.
Right? The son took 2 tribes with him. He kept 2 tribes with him. So the kingdoms were divided. 2 tribes were with him plus Levites. The other one took 10 tribes
Elijah.
plus Levites.
Dead. He has to be charged.
Right? So this became northern Israel. Right? And this became the southern kingdom of Judah. Now the kingdoms became what is known as the house of Israel and the house of Judah.
You sure?
It's not in my daddy.
You sure?
No.
Can I look?
Northern kingdom Israel, the strongest or the biggest tribe or the leading tribe there was the tribe of Joseph. So it became the house of Joseph. And later, because of his son, he became known as the house of Ephraim. All these terms, house of Israel, house of Joseph, house of Ephraim, they all have to do with the same thing, the northern tribes of Israel. This one just became Judah, what we know today as the Jews. People in the land today, they're the Jews. Northern Israel was sent out to the nations and dispersed. They became undistinguishable. God said, I give you a certificate of divorce. He divorced them. Said, I'm no longer your God. But then he prophesied, on that day, you will once again be known as the people of God. I will be your God. In the place where it was said to you, you are no longer my people, it shall be said to you, you are the sons of the living Elohim. You are the sons of the living God. So he promises to redeem these people. Yeah? They stayed with the Father, they stayed in the land. He kept the promise of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob through these guys. Right? But northern kingdom Israel was sent out into the nations. Dispersed. They became as the nations. Nobody knows who are actually part of it. Right? Or very few people know about their lineage back to them. So what he does is he comes back and he says, I came only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But anybody that wants to come in and graft through them, grafted. That's what grafted in means. You become part of the northern kingdom Israel. You are grafted into the wild olive tree. Yeah? And so you become part of this group here. You are brought back in as a son, as part of the kingdom of God. So that's what happened there. Now the feast of Shavuot. Is that right?
Yeah.
Alright, so. And there's.
Was it?
Let's read it. Okay. So that's what happened, and then the promise is for northern kingdom Israel that will return in the later day. Right, it says that Ephraim, talking of the house of Ephraim, wakes up in the nations, and it says, our fathers have inherited us lies and things that profit us nothing. They beat themselves on the thigh, it says, and they repent and ask God to forgive them, and they are brought back in. Right? There's hundreds and hundreds of prophecies about the return of Ephraim from the nations. But Ephraim means what? What's the meaning of the word Ephraim?
Does that come from the word ephah?
Possibly. What does ephah mean?
Isn't that a measurement of a weight measurement?
An ephah? No. Ephraim means, we shall be told Ephraim, double portion. Yeah? Portion. Or double portion or double blessing. It says that Ephraim brings the wealth of the nations when he returns. Right? The prophecies of the return of Ephraim, he brings the wealth of the nations. Right? So Ephraim at his return brings a double portion. Yeah. Why is it called a double portion?
The firstborn.
Yeah, he carries the blessing of the firstborn. Remember when the crossing of the hands and the blessing happened? When Manasseh was the firstborn, but he said, no, this is what God wants. Manasseh shall be great, but Ephraim shall have the double blessing of the firstborn. The double blessing, the double portion of the father's blessing. So Ephraim returns. That's why we have 2 loaves, because he's from the nations. It's the Feast of Nations. Okay, what else do we bring on the Feast of Shavuot? What's the Feast of Shavuot for? What do the people of the nation bring on Shavuot? What does everyone bring? Like if the temple was up, what would we bring to the temple?
7 lambs. And there was a goat.
Yeah. Not so specific, generally. What do we bring?
Thanksgiving, food,
So gifts,
gifts, yeah.
right, of Thanksgiving. Also known as offerings. What else? One other thing. So the gifts, the loaves, sorry, 2 other things. Loaves and tithes. The tithes of all because it's a harvest, right? The tithe of harvest. The 10th of your harvest. Right? During the first mention of the Passover, what did we get out of Egypt after Passover? As soon as Passover was finished, what happened?
First fruits.
First fruits came, right? The people went out of the land. So we can say there was a tithe of people. They were separated, yeah? They were separated from Egypt. It was a tithe of people. God set apart Israel. He took a tithe of people. He separated unto himself a people called Israel. Right? He separated a tithe, basically, from the harvest of people. He took a nation called Israel and set them apart. What happened in Shavuot?
They gave tithes to the Levites, or was it? I don't know.
He's separating another tithe of people, right? He's bringing back northern kingdom Israel with the nations. He's setting himself apart, another tithe of people. The same thing. So Shavuot is about tithe. But tithe is not just about money. Right? We know that tithe is not just about money. Right? We tithe our time, we tithe our song, we tithe our hearts, we tithe from everything, not just from money. Yeah? Produce. Right? Most of tithe is actually produce, not money. Take a kilo of potatoes to church next time you go. Original tithe, right? Produce from the land.
Yeah, I have a friend who would disagree with that.
I'm sure people disagree with everything.
They're allowed to.
Well, there is some money. There's silver coins, right, which we can exchange, but we're going to talk about that in a second, I guess. Or maybe not. I'll just give you the text. Deuteronomy 14, 22 to 29.
Read it.
Yep. Yes.
You will surely set aside a tenth of all the of all the yield of your seed that comes from the field year by year. You are to eat the tithe of your grain, your new wine, your oil, and the firstborn of your herd and flock before Adonai your God in the place he chooses to make his name dwell, so that you may learn to fear Adonai your God always. Now suppose the way is too long for you cannot carry the tithe because the place Adonai your God chooses to set his name is too far from you. When Adonai your God blesses you, then you are to exchange the tithe for silver. Bind up the silver in your hand and go to the place that Adonai your God chooses. You may spend the money for whatever your soul desires, cattle, sheep, wine, strong drink, for whatever your soul asks of you. Then you will eat there before Adonai your God and rejoice, you and your household. But you are not to neglect the Levite within your gates, for he has no portion or inheritance with you. At the end of every 3 years, you are to bring out all the tithe of your produce in that year and store it within your gates. Then the Levite, because he has no portion or inheritance with you, along with the outsider, the orphan and the widow within your gates, will come and eat and be satisfied, so that Adonai your God may bless you in all the work of your hand that you do.
All right. Tithe of Shavuot. Tithe of Shavuot is for you to eat it. What? Bring your tithe so you can eat it.
To invite the Levite, what did I miss out?
So this is the second tithe. So the first tithe is during Passover, first fruits. First fruits is tithe 1. Tithe number 1. Right? First fruits of Shavuot is tithe number 2. What? There's more than one tithe? Yes, there's actually 4 tithes. 4 types of tithes. At least 4. I can actually separate a couple more, but anyway. 4 tithes at least. 3 which are for everyone, and only 1 which is for the Levites to give to the sons of Aaron. Okay? So the first tithe is the tithe of the Levites, or those who teach the Torah, right? The first tithe is to the teachers. The second tithe is for you. The second tithe is yours. You need to bring it, bless it, and you get to keep it. Eat it. If you don't get here in time, that's fine. You know, because it's too far or whatever. That's fine. You can just go and make a party and eat it along the way with your family. Rejoice. Don't forget to invite the Levite near you.
Your local Levite.
Your local Levite. Party with the Levites. Right? Huh?
Who's the Levites near me?
Those who teach the Torah. They're basically under the Levitical covenant. So that's a good way to give tithe. Who wants to give tithe like that?
Yep.
This is the tithe of feast. The reason why this tithe was given was so that you could have no excuse whenever you came to the feast. Abba said, here's a provision for you so that you have food for traveling, that you have transportation and all these things that you need to get here, because I need you guys to come 3 times a year, right? So we see that in Deuteronomy 16 to 17. I'll put it, I'm not going to read it, but it's Deuteronomy 16 and 17. That's 3 times a year. 3 times a year you are to come to give tithes. You are to present yourself before Jehovah. You shall not come empty-handed. Right? So you need to bring your gifts and your tithes. Right? The third tithe is only done once every 3 years, which is the tithe of the poor. That tithe is set apart for people who have need within the community. The orphans, the widows, right? The stranger who hasn't got a place to live and needs food and clothing and warmth, right? That's what the third tithe is for. I think it's pretty good. What do you reckon?
I agree.
Right? It's all about caring for one another, and you even get to keep your own third of the tithe.
And he doesn't mind me caring for us.
Yeah.
You know?
So 33.3% of your tithe is yours. Yours for the feasts. right? So that you can keep the feast of God, so that you can make it to the appointed times that He set out for you. So He's not only telling you to keep the appointed times, He's providing for you. Right? The tithes are His, right? That's what the scripture says. All tithes are mine. Well, He's giving you a third of that tithe for yourself. In fact, 50% for 2 years and a third on the third year. So we got no excuses. Exodus 23, 10 to 19. It gives us a little bit of more of an insight into this. You're okay to read it? It's the final one. We'll read that one and finish off.
What is it?
Exodus 23, verse 10 to 19.
And for 6 years you are to sow your land and shall gather its increase. But the 7th year you are to lay it rest, and shall leave it, and the poor of your people shall eat. And what they leave, the beasts of the field eat. Do the same with your vineyard and your olive yard. 6 days you are to do your work, and on the 7th day you rest, in order that your ox and your donkey might rest, and the son of your female servant and the sojourner be refreshed. And in all that I have said to you, take heed, and make no mention of the name of other mighty ones. Let it not be heard from your mouth. 3 times in the year you are to celebrate a festival to me. Guard the festival of Matzot. 7 days you eat unleavened bread, as I commanded you, at the time appointed in the month of Aviv. For in it you came out of Egypt, and do not appear before the men of Egypt. And the festival of the harvest, the first fruit of your labourers, which you have sown in the field. And the festival of the ingathering at the epoch of the year, when you have gathered in the fruit of your labours from the field. 3 times in the year, all your males are to appear before the Adon Yehovah. Do not offer the blood of my slaughtering with leavened bread, and the fat of my festival shall not remain until morning. Bring the first of the first fruit of your land into the house of Yehovah, your Elohim. Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk.
Can you read the next verse after that?
See, I am sending a messenger before you to guard you in the way, and to bring you into the place which I have prepared.
Right. So this all these instructions about the 3 feasts, and all of a sudden the goat comes out.
Yeah.
What's that about? Right? Why the goat in the middle of this feast stuff? What do you think?
Because of cooked goats.
What was the point of that commandment?
It was related to a pagan festival, isn't it?
No.
No?
Does it have to be Azazel goat?
Could be, but not directly. What's the point of not cooking a goat in its mother's milk?
Everyone get your context filters out.
Yeah.
Get your context filters out when you see what this means.
Yeah. Well, what's milk supposed to do to a baby? Nurture it, right? What would it be like to boil a baby in its mum's milk?
Morally wrong, ethically wrong.
So basically it's about preservation of life, right?
Respect for life.
Respect for the things that are, living. So we're not to kill the animal with the baby as well, right? It's
So
another
obviously
law that
for-
tells us that we're not to kill the baby with the mother. So that life is preserved, right? So that the genetic makeup still goes on, right? There's something about the preservation of life that God always holds dear, right? Israel was destined to die. It was cursed. He said it would never come back again. Right? But Messiah, through his death, redeems Israel. Is pointing back to the redemption. So the whole thing about Shavuot is pointing back to the redemption. Right? So the whole work of Shavuot is the feast of redemption, the feast of the nations, the feast of ingathering, right? The harvest of wheat, which symbolizes the nations, right? Is the feast of the gospel. Right? The doors are open, guys. You can all come in and be part of the house of God. Bring your gifts, bring your tithes, bring the goodness of your land and of your labor. Come and rejoice. Eat it yourself. This is for you. It's not for him. He doesn't need it, right? He doesn't need any of the tithes, but it's for your own benefit that you bring your tithe. So Shavuot, very important feast. Right? In many ways, is the most important feast. Not because it's centered around Messiah's work and is the message of redemption for all of us, bringing us back home. All right, I'll leave it at that. Go home, read your Bible.
Barbara, did you mention that it's also a Shabbat?
Yeah, it's a high Shabbat, so there's no work to be done on that day, no cooking, so you need to prepare ahead for that day. So cook ahead of time.
If it's the day after Shabbat, or is it
Friday night. So Friday night begins Shabbat,
yeah?
and it ends Sunday night.
So it ends Sunday night.
Yeah.
So it's 2 days back to back.
Yeah, 2 days back to back.
Okay.
Yeah, plus the Friday night. Hebrew days begin in the night, in the evening.
Yeah.
So till Sunday evening. So don't forget, for next Sunday, bake 2 loaves of bread per family.
We bake 2 loaves.
Not individual, we can have even then we have tons of bread.
We're going to be on the other side as well.
So 2 loaves of bread, bring your gifts and your offering. Gifts, we usually just bring some fruit and veggies or whatever. We fill up a table there and then we all take some of it. Alright? We share all that. And then bring your tithes, which you separated for the feasts. And we're going to wave them before God and ask Him to bless our land and the fruit of our work. Yep. And then you get it back. You take it back. Awesome. And don't forget to invite me to your parties. Awesome. Alright. Can I have Graham pray us off, please?
Father, we are grateful that we've come to the end of our lesson tonight. Father, we thank you that as we prepare our hearts for the upcoming feast of Shavuot, Father, we just ask that you prepare our hearts that we may celebrate it in truth, that we may be acknowledged that you are our God, that you are the one that created this feast for us, that you will be remembered throughout all our generations. Thank you for this day, Father. We ask that you bless each and every one of us here. In Yeshua's name. Amen.
Amen. All right. Shabbat Shalom.